We hear from apprentices who've lost out during the lockdown.
I haven't done any work since lockdown because I haven't been given the opportunity to. I've got no grades to show for the 6 months that I worked for them and no money really, so it's kind of just been a waste.
The lockdown has been particularly hard on young workers. The summer's usually a good time for young people to look for jobs in shops, restaurants, pubs, bars, and it's a time when employers recruit school leavers and graduates. Not this year. The government's trying to help by paying new bonuses to employers to take on apprentices. But some people already in apprenticeships have lost out since the lockdown. Alec Baker lives in Dorset. He's 19 and Emily Gray's 20 and she lives in Reading. They told me what's happened to them.
I do a level 4 AAT accounting apprenticeship, which will get me to become a qualified accountant once I've done the next year of it. And then I'm hoping to go on to do AAC, which is chartership.
Alec, tell me about your apprenticeship. What were you doing?
So I was doing a level 3 outdoor apprenticeship with an outdoor adventure company. I had to lead outdoor sessions with young people and adults. It can be loads of things, from doing like zip wire sessions, or for 6 weeks I was up at 7:30 in the morning and 9 o'clock at night leading a bunch of 12 to 13-year-old kids. And the whole goal at the end was really to just get the equivalent of 2 A levels and then move on to university.
What were they paying you?
So I was being paid £2.70 an hour.
Did they pay your accommodation or your meals? Were there any other benefits?
I got accommodation and I got food as well. They weren't particularly amazing.
What's happened with your apprenticeship and your qualification now, Alec?
Not a lot, really. I got a few emails and they were all quite vague. They have no idea what's going on. They were all very impersonal, like copy-paste to a lot of members of staff. I have absolutely no idea when they're going to reopen. It could be halfway through next year, and I just can't wait that long. I wanted to go to university this year, so I'm going to move on to college and get to university through that way.
Emily, tell me about your apprenticeship. Have you been happy with it until now?
Well, I was actually extremely lucky with my apprenticeship because I wasn't put on furlough throughout this whole situation. I was actually able to work from home. That sort of meant that my on-the-job learning didn't just come to a sudden standstill, which is obviously quite a big thing for apprenticeships because you have so many exams to do. And I've had a lot of support from my training provider, WBTC. For me, the biggest impact of it all was just that I haven't been able to sit exams, so I can't really progress on as quickly as I'd like to. The date that I'll actually be able to get the overall qualification will be pushed back probably about 6 months minimum, depending on how quickly they can get exams going. So obviously if I qualify later, then it's just going to have a knock-on effect on everything. I'm not going to be able to get a salary increase because I'll still qualify as an apprentice rather than a qualified accountant.
I haven't done any work since lockdown because I haven't been given the opportunity to. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do because I wanted to go on and move on to music and sound production, which is completely different. But it was a means of getting to where I wanted to go to, and that means has really been taken away.
Because if you'd completed it, what would it have been? It would have qualified you for university.
Yeah. So I only need one more A level to get into university. So I'm just really close, and it's quite frustrating. So I would have had 2 more A levels after completing it.
Could I ask you both, what advice then would you give to somebody who's thinking about doing an apprenticeship now, perhaps one of these new government-funded apprenticeships? What should they bear in mind? Emily?
I've personally had a really positive experience with my apprenticeship, where I've learned so much actually at work as well as at college. I don't think you'd be able to do that just by going to college. It sort of takes both to be able to get as much knowledge as possible. Overall, I would probably encourage people to do it.
Alec, what would you say? What advice would you give yourself then, a year or so ago, when you decided to go for an apprenticeship rather than going to college as you're going to do now?
I think that perhaps I was being a bit naive, and I agree with Emily. The work experience is really good. Like, not many people my age have the experience of working for a company like I did. But I think the main problem is that, like big companies that I used to work for, is they might take advantage of you, particularly with your low wages.
Is that how you feel then, that you were just cheap labour?
Pretty much, yeah. I was on £2.70 an hour, and now I've sort of been cast away.
But that's the deal, isn't it, when you take on an apprenticeship? You know, the pay is low. As you say, you've had this great work experience.
Absolutely, yeah. But A-level students don't have the problems that I've had to face. They've gotten their predicted grades and such, and they're going to move on. I've got no grades to show for the 6 months that I worked for them, and no money really, so it's kind of just been a waste. So I'd really just bear in mind really the employer that you want to work for and what reputation they've got and if they can provide for you really.
That was Alec Baker and Emily Gray. Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has been warning that the current crisis will blight the career progression and earning potential of today's young people, perhaps for years to come. Paul Johnson is the director of the IFS. Paul Johnson, welcome to You and Yours. When it comes to apprenticeships, what will the new incentives that will be offered to employers, what will they be?
Thank you. And yes, it's great to be on and listen to those two young people. One of my sons has just finished a higher level apprenticeship, so he's just about managed to get to the other end of that. But
what did he think of it, Paul?
It's been great. It was an apprenticeship in software engineering. And as your last guest said, what really matters is the employer that you're working for, and he was very fortunate to have a very good one. So he's now got a really well paid job at the age of 20, not having had to go through the university debt or anything like that either. So it's been great for him.
So the new incentives for employers, how will they work?
Fairly straightforwardly, which is that any employer taking on an apprenticeship under the age of 25 will get an additional £2,000 incentive payment towards doing that. And that's likely to be very necessary because surveys of employers who have historically taken on apprentices suggested that a very large fraction of them were intending either not to take any at all this coming autumn or to cut back on the numbers that they were taking, not surprisingly given the state of the economy and the state of demand for the sorts of things firms are doing. And it's obviously easier not to take people on than it is to get rid of people if you don't have demand for your goods. But the hope is that this £2,000 incentive will make at least some difference to the numbers of apprenticeships. But actually, if we manage to keep up the same number as last year, we'll be doing well. I don't think this is a sum of money which is going to see a huge explosion in the number of apprenticeships.
The government's also going to spend more than £300 million, so more than 100 million, tripling the scale of what it calls proven traineeships this year and next. These kind of ideas have been tried before, haven't they, in times of high youth unemployment? Do they work?
They can do. It really does depend on how they're designed. So those who are as old as I am remember the 1980s. We had something called youth training schemes and youth opportunity programs, and they really didn't work very well because they were at a mass scale. They were cheap, and essentially they did end up providing just cheap labour for firms with very little in the way of training. On the other hand, there are the biggest scheme the government announced last week actually was something called a Kickstart, which is going to be a substantial subsidy for employers taking on young people. And that's fairly much modelled on something that was done by the last Labour government during the last crisis, which worked pretty well. So if you've got something that's well-resourced, you don't try to do too much of it because it is quite hard to manage these schemes, and you're making sure that you're taking people who will really benefit from it. And yes, they can work, but as I say, you really do need to get the details right for them to actually work.
Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, thank you.